In a world gone mad, only rationality and common sense can save it. It's Andrew and Jerry Save the World with your hosts, Andrew Langer and Jerry Rogers. And now, here's Andrew and Jerry.
Well, hey there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Andrew and Jerry Save the World, episode 47. Andrew and Jerry handle classified material. I am Andrew Langer.
And Jerry Rogers.
And I guess I could have said, Jerry, it could have been Andrew and Jerry Save classified material because we seem to be in this mess. We got a bunch of stuff to talk about today. We're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about the gas stove issues. We're going to talk about parody accounts. We may talk a little bit about Larry Hogan. But the big story, and this, it's actually good, I think, Jerry, that we didn't do an actual show last week. We took a sort of half a week off. In that this story has developed quite a bit over the last, since you and I last did a show, this story has really had legs, hasn't it?
Well, sure it has, only because the mainstream media is trying to cover up itself. And what I mean by that is that we've known about this, or the DOJ knew about this, the FBI, and of course, some in mainstream media knew about this classified situation, classified documents with Joe Biden, knew about it before the election, at least a week before the election, and yet everyone sat on it. And again, that's a component that's not being discussed in mainstream media, the fact that this wasn't reported and how that could have suppressed the vote, how that could have impacted the midterm elections, number one. Number two, is this the sunsetting of Joe Biden? Is this the mechanism now where the Democrats and the left, the media, will move Joe to the exit? And then, of course, there are the false comparisons, comparing the Joe Biden circumstance with the Trump Mar-a-Lago raid, and the two situations, as a matter of law and a matter of practice, could not be more different.
Well, yeah, and it's interesting to me because I like, sort of pulling it back out to the 35,000 foot level. What I love is the mental gymnastics that takes place, not in terms of sort of differentiating between the law, but in differentiating between the intents and the states of the men. The Joy Behars and Whoopi Goldbergs of the world who get out there and say, well, I believe Joe Biden because Joe Biden is a good guy and he never lies.
Of course, but again, but the response to Joy Behar and others, the status of his heart, whether he's a good guy or a bad guy, doesn't make a difference. Joe Biden broke the law. He admitted so much last week. Even if he took these things inadvertently,
yes,
it's still a violation of the law.
It's interesting because, and it's funny because I had a conversation for the other podcast with Lynn Ulbricht, who's the mother of Ross Ulbricht, who is the inventor of Silk Road, one of the inventors of Silk Road, who's in jail. And we're talking about, I went on a bit of a rant about not rant, but a discussion lecture about the question of intent and why intent is such an important part of the law. You're right, insofar as if he held on to the documents, that in and of itself is the breaking of the law. There is this other issue, and it gets to the general issue of the Hunter Biden laptop revelations, and just what was happening, the questions about just what was happening in the vice president's office while Joe Biden was vice president, and what his son was doing outside. And then getting into the retention of these documents in his home, whether or not that home is secured or not, is immaterial insofar as when you have a family member who is being paid by entities that are either owned or otherwise controlled by foreign governments, and that family member could potentially have access to this classified material that could pertain to the goings-on and the policy decision-making regarding these foreign governments. That's the problem here. I mean, it gets back to everything that I've said about Hunter Biden, the Hunter Biden laptop, the Hunter Biden laptop investigation, and why it's important, not for any of the, listen, we could talk about the moral issues, and we could talk about the salacious bits that get uncovered in the Hunter Biden laptop. The fundamental question, the fundamental question is whether or not the vice president's office was not just for sale, but was also being offered for sale and what might have been exchanged by Hunter Biden or others that came out of the vice president's office. I'm sorry, Jerry, go ahead.
Well, again, that's the fourth thing. I mentioned three already, but the fourth thing is that the Joe Biden classified docs is not about his intention. It's not about whether or not it was properly secured. And by the way, Andrew, classified documents cannot be properly stored or viewed outside of a SCIF, right? What's a sensitive compartmented information facility?
Yes.
And his garage, whether his garage was locked or not, it doesn't make a difference. They shouldn't have been there. And here's what folks have told me. And I've been talking to members of Congress. In fact, I just before our show got off the phone with a member's office on a different issue. But I did ask about this,
Jerry.
A little bit.
I don't really care what Hank Johnson thinks about these things.
Hank Johnson, yeah. Well, you know, the island might tip one way or the other. Hank Johnson, of course, a ridiculous congressman, Democrat, who
surmised that Guam would tip over if there was too much population.
Yeah. And his latest craziness is that these documents were planted. But what experts have told me is that you can't take documents out of a SCIF,
right,
without knowingly doing it.
Right. So
therefore, intent is moot because Biden took these things out with the intent of taking them. That's the law, and he broke it. And he admitted so much last week. But here's the kicker. I think most Americans, because we're so distracted, and we've talked about this, how the average American has the attention span that's 8 seconds. A goldfish is 9 seconds. I think what the Biden team is hoping for is that the American people won't pay attention.
Right.
Congress obviously doesn't pay attention. And then that the FBI, the DOJ will use prosecutorial discretion and not charge him. And that's what he's hoping for. But here's another element of this that we haven't mentioned yet that's critical. Why are his attorneys allowed to gather this information? They don't have classified clearance. And again, why isn't the FBI collecting the material? Remember, this is classified. It ought to be the FBI doing this, not his attorneys. And sure. Again, that's very curious. And here's to your point, why I think his attorneys are doing it is because this is about grift. This is about selling the office of the vice presidency. Yeah. This is about Hunter Biden, the Biden laptop more than anything else. These classified documents, again, this is speculation, but if I had to guess, I would guess that this is all rolled up in the Biden enterprises. And someone said recently that the Biden family would be a perfect sixth mafia family, the sixth family of in the mafia, that they're able to have this criminal enterprise.
You know, maybe that's why this stuff is now coming out in the media, right? And again, now this is speculation, and this is me wearing my tinfoil hat. I need to pull that out. In fact, Jerry, I should make a tinfoil hat and have it here, put it on. But, you know, we've been talking about this issue of whether or not the Democrats are going to dump Joe Biden. And after the midterms, it seemed reasonably assured that Joe Biden would remain on the ticket going into 2024. It is now January.
And the fact that he, kind of grew up and went to a black church, that kind of insulates him.
Well, yes, of course it does. But the point is that it's January of 2023. We are a year out from the first primaries, right? And if the Democrats want to have a primary, they got to start planning for it now. One wonders if they finally realize, some people within the power structure. Jerry and I have spent a lot of time talking about the elites, right? The backfilled rooms. In fact, it was one of the reasons why Jerry was really buoyed by the transparency of the speaker's race, that it wasn't behind closed doors. Like we need more decisions being made out in front. So Jeremy, the theory that I'm advancing here is that somebody finally realizes that with the Republicans going after this Hunter Biden investigation and the investigation of the alleged crimes of the Biden family, somewhere in the Democratic power structure, they know that they're going to have to dump Joe Biden between now and January of 2024. So they're laying the groundwork now. That's why this stuff is coming out now.
I think you're right, but I also think that there are several things happening here at once. Number one, I think Biden got caught with his pants down. Number two, I think that the FBI should be looking at and gathering these material. His lawyers are, and that signifies there's a Hunter Biden connection here. Another issue here, and again, for our friends who are probably screaming at their device saying, why don't you mention the Trump scandal? But here's the thing, and why these two issues don't compare. Because, and again, I posted this over at the Jerry Rogers Show page. I might tweet it out later. But the fact of the matter is, and Barry Rifkin did a real good piece for the Wall Street Journal several months ago, where he lays out plainly that the raid on Mar-a-Lago was illegal, that the former president, even as former president, is legally allowed access to his papers, White House documents, right, both classified. But here's the kicker: both classified and not classified. And that the former president, was in negotiation because the government owns these papers. He was in negotiation to hand these things over, and the FBI raided publicly. Right, this was a public event, a publicity stunt even. But here's the kick there. If you notice, no one at DOJ, Merrick Garland's office, you're not hearing legal experts, Democratic legal experts, talk about former President Trump having classified information, how he put troops in jeopardy or assets in.
Right.
No, what they're saying now is obstruction.
Yes.
And here's going to be the twist. The classified material at Mar-a-Lago, it's not about whether or not the president could have had that information. He could. It was legal for him to have it. The raid on Mar-a-Lago was illegal. However, what the special counsel and what the DOJ will charge him, will be obstruction, i.e., he obstructed the turnover of the documents. That's a lot different from Biden, and this is the problem for Biden now. They cannot move forward with a prosecution of Trump over obstruction and not move forward with a prosecution of having these documents illegally for Biden, and that goes to your speculation,
right,
that this is really they're moving him, they're sunsetting him, moving him to the exit.
Wow, I mean, and you think about it. I mean, this is. It's a brilliant move on the part of Kamala Harris, to say the least. Anyway,
well, follow up with that, because here's the only thing that might stop them from sunsetting him, and that is there's no one to run and win. There's lots of people can run. I mean, Sheila Jackson Lee, that lunatic from Texas, could run. But the bottom line is, Pete Buttigieg has found out that you can't hide as transportation secretary. Right. So he's done. Well, Kamala Harris.
Sorry, go ahead.
I mean, so Vice President Harris is not a good candidate. Neither is Pete Buttigieg. The only star right now, rising star in the Democratic Party, is Governor-elect, the new governor of the soon-to-be governor of Maryland, and that's Wes Moore. And so there's the question: can Wes Moore be governor of Maryland for a year and then run in a primary for president?
You're overlooking Mrs. Obama.
Yeah, you know what? And you've talked about this. We've talked about this.
Yeah.
I've always said that she's the big threat.
Right.
And I think if she runs, she wins.
Right.
But
absolutely.
But she has no interest in running.
They say that now. They always say they have no interest in running. Right. And then that way they can say, I had no interest, but America needs me.
Well, you're right about that. Michelle Obama is the strongest personality. Remember, politics is no longer about whether or not you are a good stateswoman or statesman. It's about celebrity.
Right.
And she's the biggest celebrity on that side. And I think she beats Trump, certainly. But my thing is, I don't even think Trump's going to run. But DeSantis is in trouble there too. But again, stranger things have happened And who knows? I've been wrong about almost everything when it comes to predicting who wins elections.
And we listen, but we are, and part of it is because we are in a very strange season. I mean, to say the least, we are in, and by season, I mean in the Game of Thrones kind of these years long winters that sort of, yeah, we're rewatching parts of we're rewatching Game of Thrones with which is a whole thing.
It is kind of funny, though, that, like we just said, that the mainstream media, the Democrats are perhaps moving Biden to the door, to the exit. But then you have Chuck Todd on Meet the Press. I can't believe that Chuck Todd is a journalist on Meet the Press, by the way. But regardless of that.
Well, Jerry, we know he's a journalist because he tells us so, but go ahead.
Right. But he was in full defense mode on over this weekend. In fact, going after Senator Ron Johnson in a very inappropriate way, so inappropriate that even other media outlets called him out, circling the wagons to protect Hunter Biden. Why is Chuck Todd from Meet the Press protecting Hunter Biden? It makes no sense.
But you have folks who are in this category, right? We know that there's a certain percentage of the population who will, in the same way that there was a certain percentage of the population who would defend Donald Trump no matter what Donald Trump did. There is a certain, especially in the journalistic class, there are some folks who believe, right? The difference has always been between progressives and conservatives in that, progressives, they can be intellectually inconsistent. They can be contradictory. They can be hypocritical. But Chuck Todd may not want to be hypocritical, so he's wedded to this position. And there are always going to be folks who are like that. But no, that was the worst kind of ambush journalism, in a way that we actually haven't seen in a long time. The idea of Ron Johnson, who, up until this election cycle, it's been a very long time since I've thought of Ron Johnson as a firebrand or controversial in any way. And yet they were going after Ron Johnson. Chuck Todd was going after Ron Johnson as though he were Matt Gaetz, as though he were Marjorie Taylor Greene. And in the end, they were inappropriate questions. It's not up to Ron Johnson to have to figure out which crimes it is, especially in an environment which there are so many different crimes that can be.
But the irony there is if Chuck Todd did his homework, Chuck Todd should be able to read from a list. Here's where, Senator, here are the potential criminal activities. Well, what say you? Put the senator
because in the end, what he was trying to do is catch him in a Rick Perry moment, where he would have some kind of a brain freeze and not come up with an answer.
But again, you're right. That is the worst type of ambush journalism.
Yeah. It's interesting because by the same token, you had Matt Gaetz tweeting out that he actually got asked substantive questions by CNN that were not gotcha questions, and speculating aloud if this is some change at CNN. And it may very well be, though. I think
it goes to your theory.
Yes,
CNN will want to make Matt Gaetz seem reasonable and acceptable, so he becomes their useful tool at CNN.
Well, that's part of it, right? It's also that CNN has him on because they think that they can embarrass Matt Gaetz, right?
Right. But I don't think I again. Let me say this: I do not take Matt Gaetz seriously. I think it's dangerous to quote him, to cite him. To look at what he's presenting. He is a guy that he's even past trust but verify for me. He's a strange. There's a bunch of them on the Republican side that no matter what they do, even if I agree with it, I'm not going to talk about it in the context of them.
Dude, I don't know. I lived in that district for a few years, and I do not know what is in the water in that district, but you will recall that before Matt Gaetz. So Matt Gaetz is the member from that district because he ran on his father's name. His father was a very famous state senator, who a friend of mine worked for a few years, but he was preceded in office by Joe Scarborough, who, as you will recall, also had to step away under very weird, mysterious circumstances. Right?
I was thinking about him recently because he had a fit recently about how oh my goodness, the Republicans care more about a gas stove than they do about Putin.
Yes.
And I thought to myself, what is wrong with this man? Why is Putin so much on his brain? And why can't we do two things at once? Why can't we discuss the overstepping of regulations and foreign
right?
policy?
Somebody was out there the other day, and you know me, I'm trying to not engage in battles on Twitter or social media.
No, you're not.
I'm trying not to. I really am trying.
Love it.
Believe me, Jerry. Believe me, I am trying not to. But somebody posted something about in response to Dan McLaughlin, over at the National Review.
Oh yes, sure.
And essentially calling Dan and the National Review a bunch of Trump and MAGA apologists.
Oh, that's insane.
And I said
Dan was one of the first conservatives to support impeachment of Donald Trump.
Right.
What are they talking about? That's so stupid.
And so I said, clearly you've never read anything that Dan McLaughlin has written on the
Right.
subject. You were unfamiliar with the oeuvre of the National Review. And this guy said, well, he never wrote about this and he never wrote about that. It was one of those situations where we get into this pattern where because you don't condemn everything all the time, right? We got into this with some of our former colleagues, right? Where if you're not condemning every single little itty bitty thing, well, then you must agree with that, and therefore, if you agree with any little bit of it, and of course, that's
I guess also that this person missed the what was the Never Trump front page of
right. It was a magazine cover.
National
Never
Review.
Trump.
National Review coined the phrase
I think
Never Trump.
And then it was the issue of, and Dan rightly said, Never Trump is not to be confused with Never Republican.
Right.
And he's absolutely correct in that. And that's something we need to guard against, right? And that's, by the way, folks.
I know, right? We can no longer be in favor of tax cuts because Donald Trump was in favor of tax cuts.
This is exactly what the Democrats want. This is part of them. This is rank and file. This is not, I don't think this is a Democratic Party thing or progressive leadership thing, but it has become a meme, a statement on the part of the Democrats. And this is what they want. They want Never Trump to become Never Republicans. Why? Because that way the Democrats win.
Sure.
Right? If there's no acceptable Republican candidate because on 1/10 of the issues they happen to agree with Donald Trump, then therefore you need to vote for somebody else. Which is,
and again,
sadly, hold on. Sadly, what our friends like Jonah Goldberg have now become. Go ahead, Bill Kristol. Another one.
Right. You're right about that. Many of them have become anti-GOP, anti-conservative. But the funny thing is, many of Donald Trump's positions, especially on trade and on manufacturing, are center to the Democratic mission,
right,
in terms of jobs and wages. So it's interesting. Arthur Brooks, the former head of the American Enterprise Institute, he now writes a column over at The Atlantic and other things, talked about how the best way to have a conversation with a lefty is to take their own value sets and their own language and just turn it around on them on these other issues and say, well, you say this, but in this context, well, I agree with you there. Well, of course you do. And again, on manufacturing and on wages, on unions, the left agrees with Donald Trump.
This is why we couldn't get a transportation and infrastructure bill all 4 years of the Donald Trump presidency when the Democrats were in power of Congress. Right? Donald Trump brought them in, but they refused to give him anything. And this is
same
why
thing. Oh, my goodness, same thing with the Dreamers. Donald Trump signed off on an enforcement mechanism, but also a citizenship mechanism for immigration reform, and the Democrats just wouldn't sign off on it.
Right. And that's the something, we need to be better about talking about those situations where when it's not convenient, right? The left says that they want compromise, but when there's compromise because it's the other team, they don't want it, which is a very dangerous place for America to be.
And I hope Republicans don't do that. I hope that the House, even with a narrow majority, I hope that if there is a good piece of legislation on immigration, say, that there's compromise and consensus in the Senate, no one gets everything they want, but it's a way to a way to move forward. I hope that
normally inclined to
Republicans
agree with you, Jerry, but let's turn it back, right? Because you and I have spent a lot of time talking about these issues where these situations where we don't use their tactics against them.
right.
But
Well, that's the whole thing, and cheers, right? Bravo to Kevin McCarthy for taking Eric Swalwell off the Intelligence Committee, and congratulations on taking these other Schiff, who lied consistently about Russiagate, and the other congresswoman, the anti-Semitic congresswoman from
Ayanna Pressley.
Elon.
Ilhan Omar.
Yeah, I mean,
Elon
again,
Musk Omar.
they're all now crying foul.
Yeah.
But at the time when Nancy Pelosi stripped Republicans of their committee assignments without input from from the Republican leadership, it was unprecedented. Yeah. But now it's done, and McCarthy's completely correct and right to do that. So my answer to your question is: do we engage in their tactics? I think some we do and some we don't.
Right.
That's, I mean, some we do and some we don't.
And some of it is, right, if you're working to build and grow a party, you have to tell the story of the party. The only way you can tell a story about a party is not just what you're against, but what you're for and what you're able to accomplish. Sure. And this is anyway, it all gets down to it. Speaking of which, right, and you and I talk about this issue of telling stories. And we spent a lot of time. I know you were working this week on some stuff, to quote our friend and mentor Fred Smith from the Competitive Enterprise Institute. And one of the things about Fred and storytelling, not Fred's own storytelling, but the storytelling of CEI by CEI, was about talking about disparate impacts and how the big government things the government was doing were going to impact those folks who are most needy.
Sure.
This story breaks, and it's literally a story that has everything that you and I talk about. We talk about the gas stove story, obviously,
sure.
Derek.
Yeah.
It is about bad policy. It's about policy that has disparate impacts on the poor. It's about bad science going along with it. And then this also thing we talked about, sort of the tactics, right? We announced we're going to ban. Somebody wants to ban gas stoves. Other entities are in the process of banning gas stoves or gas, heat, whatever, natural gas usage in homes.
And by the way, as you're saying this, I want to say something real quick. So this idea of banning natural gas, this isn't just a brand new thing happening with this news about the gas stove.
Right.
For instance, in Maryland, Montgomery County, Maryland, it is now illegal. Any new construction bans natural gas.
Yeah.
I mean, so this is happening in real time, not based on science, not based on climate change or the environment. It really is based on it's an anti-modernity and anti-human flourishing agenda. But go ahead, set it up with the gas stove.
No, it's couched in this, and then I was going to say, just the pattern. We make the announcement. There's a public outcry. We then say, well, we're not really going to do this thing, and then we're going to deny it, and we're going to say, well, now the other side is trying to make this a thing that's not really a thing.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, and then we're going to come back, and then we sort of go back and point out, oh, well, now we're definitely not going to do this thing because there's the hue and cry. Let's talk about this for a second, because this is, again, you and I had sort of noticed this, right? California's talked about it. You mentioned Montgomery County, Maryland. Kathy Hochul, the governor of New York, is talking about this. They're talking about this in New York City. I don't know about you, Jerry. I know that the apartments that I lived in New York and elsewhere, by and large, had gas stoves.
Sure.
Do you have a gas stove in your apartment? I mean, so
growing up in New York, we always had a gas stove.
Right.
It wasn't until we moved to the suburbs where we had electric for the first time, and my mother hated it. My mom did not like cooking on electric.
Oh, and there's good reason for it, right? Because with a gas stove, you can listen. Let me just talk about the wonders of gas stoves, which is that you have an immediate and direct control over your heat source. And if you need to shut off the heat to a pan or a pot, you do so immediately. And yeah, there's residual heat on the burners, but it's not the same thing. With an electric element, right? The curly Q thing.
Yep.
You turn it off and it's still hot for a really long time. So you literally have to move something off a burner. It's anyway.
And never mind if kids walk by, little kids walk by.
Oh yes. I can't tell you how many times I've burned myself as an adult on an electric element. We have gas here at home now.
For now you do, Andrew. For now,
yes. That's right. Who knows? But the point is that there is the spurious science based on this. Besides the fact that natural gas has less of a carbon footprint than other forms of. Now, I would dare say, if you think about other forms of electric generation, it has less of a carbon footprint. But the real spurious argument is that it has this impact on children's health. And it is true that childhood asthma is a serious issue, especially in inner cities.
Sure.
But the problem is that they are misdiagnosing. This is one of those situations in which correlation does not equal causation, right? There is a correlation, right? If you are in either an older apartment building, or you are in a new apartment building with a hyper efficient air conditioning system or HVAC system, that you are still exposed to, and I'm going to say this, and it's going to sound like a joke,
but it's true.
The number one cause of childhood asthma, irritation in the lungs, is from the dust particles from ground up cockroach insect shells, but the most irritating are cockroach shells.
Yeah.
I mean, and so, yeah, something, if you make a hyper efficient HVAC system and folks don't change the filters or what have you, and all this dust and dander and bug shells get blown around and kids breathe them in, yeah, they're going to get asthma. There's going to be a higher incidence of asthma in places where you've... Listen, Jerry, it's the same reason why the lockdowns in New York City didn't work, because you had all of these multi-unit dwellings where the air was being recirculated.
Sure.
And folks were breathing on each other. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in terms of COVID, the best defense against COVID is an open window, is the free flow of air. And again, of course, the public health entities got all that wrong, forcing public school systems to put all this plexiglass up, restaurants to do the same. Turns out the plexiglass captures the virus and makes it more dangerous to catch the virus. And again, old-fashioned, open the window.
No,
the masks weren't effective. The plexiglass wasn't. The hand washing to an extent, but open a window.
Can I digress on two things for a second? And the first one is, so we they lead into each other. So we're getting ready to go see Paul Reiser this weekend out at Charlestown. Tickets still available, Jerry, and they're not expensive.
All right. And by the way, Jerry Seinfeld is playing the anthem in DC.
Oh, that's fun. Is that this weekend?
It's February 10th, 11th, something like that.
Interesting. But so we're going to wind up going around Antietam Battlefield over in Western Maryland, because they're all within about 15
I've been there. I know where it
is.
Yeah.
And so we were online last night, me and Jan, sort of rabbit trailing on YouTube, and we pulled up, her med school would take I don't remember, I think it was first year med students would all go out in the springtime to Antietam and hear a lecture about battlefield medicine, because Antietam really changed things. And they tell the story of sort of the founder of modern military medicine, whose name is escaping me, who discovered that if you kept the wounded men and sick men in open air tents where there was airflow, they healed better, which gets to your point. Yeah. That's one digression. But then I wound up rabbit trailing, because we watched this movie called The Pale Blue Eye, which is on Netflix. It's a murder mystery that takes place at West Point in 1830.
Is it any good?
It's good. It's got a weird twist at the end. It's kind of weird, but it's Christian Bale, and I love Christian Bale, and Christian Bale. You know who Christian Bale is?
Of course, Batman.
Yeah, okay, Batman. But it all takes place right around West Point.
Yeah.
And because they were really hyper accurate with the outdoor scenes, like at one point there's a scene on the cliffs on the west bank of the Hudson, and you can see Anthony's Nose, which is where the Bear Mountain Bridge. Wound up going and looking at videos of hiking in Bear Mountain. And it was not one, Jerry, but two different videos in which these people from New York City or suburban New York, this is 2 years ago, were out hiking on Bear Mountain or on Anthony's Nose across the river, and they're wearing masks while they're outside. And I sat there and I said, this is my digression, Jerry.
Yeah.
50 years from now, 70 years from now, 100 years from now, are people going to look back at this as the stupid time? Are they going to see videos of people outside?
Again, it depends on your view of the future. I'm more of a despairing optimist in that I think we're just beginning the stupid times.
Okay.
Look, I mean, to your point.
So what you're saying is, Jerry, that as stupid as we were during the pandemic, we're going to get stupider in the future.
Again, let me digress, build on your digression. And that is, think about what's happening now, right? And really, the thing about the mask, ultimately what that's about is censorship, because science was censored. Open discussion, conversations, was all censored. And we did not have a robust conversation about COVID. If we did, we would have saved more lives. And then what happened is the public health entities and the politicos, instead of admitting being wrong, they doubled down on being wrong. And so, but we see more of this.
And then they tripled down, Jerry, by getting out there and actively censoring other people on social media.
But moving forward, we see more of the same, right? We see that again with the Hunter Biden laptop going into the 2020 campaign, censorship, stifling debate and exchange of ideas. Think about Senator Cardin saying that hate speech should be made illegal. Think about just this past week, I mentioned her earlier in the show, Congresswoman Sheila Dixon Lee has introduced legislation that will get a majority of Democrat votes to make it illegal to say certain things about race and about immigration.
I've read the legislation. I don't think it quite says that. There's a lot of overblown information, because I, like you did with the Don't Say Gay bill, which never says don't say gay. I read through. It's not a long bill to read. It's the issue is it's vague in its language as to what constitutes hate speech, but it doesn't specifically say you can't criticize.
It does say you can't criticize replacement theory. Sorry.
Yes.
I mean, it does. Yes.
Yes.
I mean, it says that explicitly. It says that. But my point is that it's the fact that it's vague is what makes it dangerous.
Of course.
So regardless, it shows you that Congress, or a good portion members of Congress don't have free speech values. So this is what my point is. Our trajectory is more going towards stupid than going towards smart.
And Jerry has said, by the way, Jerry also believes. I'm sorry, this sounds like I'm making out to be a conspiracy theorist, and I don't. You offer up a very thoughtful, and I mean this in all seriousness, you offer up a very thoughtful analysis of history, in which you say that you conclude, or your assertion is, that the tendency is towards authoritarianism as opposed to freedom, that democracies eventually all collapse. And this gets into what you're talking about, doesn't it, Jerry?
Yeah, and it does. And so, I mean, I hope, look, this is what encourages me. And you and I talked a little bit about this last time, I think, or we talked about it off mic. I forget about our conversations. But there is a lot of misinformation and propaganda about climate change and the environment and energy use, specifically energy use. And so over the past 10 days or so, I've been reading a lot. Alex Bernstein and Bjorn Lomborg, and Steve Malloy, and some others. And I'm encouraged that these people exist to at least push back, to be the John the Baptist, the lone voice in the wilderness. And let me just say this about energy, and because you said something earlier today about natural gas having a lesser carbon footprint. I'm not convinced. In fact, I think the science tells us that that carbon, its net impact on the environment is positive, not negative. So this idea that fossil fuel use is bad for the environment is not based on science, because if you look at the impact, like I'll give you an example. In the last 100 years, we have decreased the climate-related deaths by 99%.
Right.
And that's only because of fossil fuels.
Yes.
And we talked about in the show last time how whale oil was used, and we almost hunted the whales to extinction, and then we discovered oil. How the automobile saved cities from massive pollution because of the fear about horse manure. And the story goes on and on. I really think, Andrew, that those of us who are pro-human, can I say that?
Yeah.
That we're pro-life, pro-human, pro-modernity, we have to change the debate. Fossil fuel use is not a negative; it's a positive.
Right.
And we're teaching young people today to be afraid of it.
And let's remember, and this is the other part of it, right, Jerry? And
Right.
I appreciate this, a really good segue, because it evinces such the left's argument evinces such an ignorance of what it's not just the energy production. Right. So energy production and reducing the cost of energy production. And it gets into what I think you and I definitely talked about, because I remember I was in the car as you were talking about this, right? The fact that you have lefties who are opposed to fusion research, not just nuclear fission, but nuclear fusion research, is emblematic of the fact that they are uninterested, right? As you said, what is it you said? There's somebody who said, well, we don't want cheap energy because cheap energy would be abused by man.
Right. I mean, there was a so recently there's been, the news about fusion and these breakthroughs. We're still way far away from fusion energy, but regardless, and one leading environmentalist said that no, fusion would be horrible because it would be like giving an idiot child a machine gun.
Yes.
And so what the left progressives, what the net zero movement, what it's all about is not the environment or saving the environment. It really is about depopulation, and dehumanizing the planet. Again, they net zero by 2050. That's the goal. Leading scientists agree that to get to net zero, we will have to halve the world's population.
Right.
So who's going to volunteer to die?
Especially if you're not willing to go through and use the tools of science at your disposal to generate vast more amounts of energy using.
And again, it's interesting that you say that. I know your dad's a scientist too, but the environmental movement and the scientists within it are anti-science. It's unbelievable to me how anti-science they are.
The shorthand on all of this is, if you are talking to somebody and they advance this idea of net zero, a carbon-free energy generation, and they're not willing to contemplate either nuclear fusion or nuclear fission, which is what we have right now, then you know that their argument is not science-based, but it's politically based. It's just very simple. But my point is, though, Jerry, is that the ignorance also extends beyond energy generation, right? Because let's say that we start. We're never going to, we can't stop drilling for oil, because petroleum is used in so many other things, whether it is fertilizers, whether it is in plastics, whether it is lubricants for machines, right? You can't
fertilizer to grow.
I'm sorry. That's what I said first thing. But you cannot have wind generation, Jerry, unless you have petroleum-based grease lubricants in there, going. Otherwise, you get the massive explosions of wind turbines that we've seen before.
And again, just to make this complex issue conversational, what this means, right? The attack on fossil fuel, what it means is, again, it means more than just high-cost energy, which makes human beings poorer and less safe and less wealthy and less, and less healthy. But it also means healthcare costs go up, food costs go up, every aspect of life, the costs go up. Look, in Europe today, there are tens of thousands of people will freeze to death this winter because they can't afford energy. And Germany has sold out on green energy. And what has happened is it doesn't work. And so for the first time in the last generation, right? Europe has reforested itself, right?
Yeah.
Wealth has allowed Europe to replant all the forests they cut down 100, 200, 300 years ago, right? Because
same thing with the northeastern United
right.
States.
However, in Germany today, guess what's happening again? Deforestation.
They're cutting down
You know
trees.
why? Because they can't afford to heat their homes.
Right.
So people are going to what's around them, the environment around them, and they're cutting down trees.
I am reminded
their
this
homes.
is the first movie reference, right? I think it's the first movie reference I'm going to make on the show today, Jerry. In that, I urge you all, if you haven't seen it, go and watch the movie Reds, 1980, 1981.
The Warren Beatty
Warren
film?
Beatty, Diane Keaton, and it is about the socialist movement in America and then the Russian Revolution. And Maureen Stapleton plays Emma Goldfarb, or Emma Goldman, who was a very famous socialist who wound up being deported from the United States. And she's in Russia witnessing the revolution. And you watch her story arc as she is enthusiastic about the Bolshevik Revolution, and then is completely what's the word I'm looking for? Completely unmasked. It is completely unmasked her, despondent about it. And there's a conversation she has with Diane Keaton in which she says the people in the cities, they're dying from the cold. And yet then folks want to leave the cities to go out into the forest and cut trees, but the Bolshevik authorities are preventing them because it would not be conducive to the elements of the revolution. And Maureen Stapleton's character says, I mean, this is how I know that this is over, that if there really truly is a socialist revolution, the only place it's not happening is here, because they're crushing people, they're ignoring the facts in front of their faces. But that is the tendency of socialism around the world.
But it's
is
also
that if it's politically inconvenient, they don't do it. I'm sorry, go ahead.
And again, now full circle back to what you said about whether or not 100 years from now we're going to look back at mask use and think this is the stupid time. Well, no, because of what you just said. If the facts are inconvenient, we will ignore the facts, and that to me is the state of our political discourse of the public square. It's all censorship. It's all misdirection. And again, it's frightening to me because I give you an example, and we just build on what we already talked about in the show, the gas stove. The left, the media is now telling us that the right started a culture war over the gas stove.
Right.
No, what happened was that some, and it's not even the right. It's just regular people saying, no, this is ridiculous. I'm not going to give up my gas stove. And the left has been able to temporarily say, no, we're not going to do this.
Gets into a very important point, which is always believe the left when they start doing something.
Yes, always.
They telegraph what they want to do. This is a goal for them. And it is, even if the guy at the Consumer Product Safety Commission doesn't get his ban on gas stoves at the CPSC, somebody else is going to try to do it, like they're doing in New York, like they've done in California,
in Maryland,
like what they're doing in Montgomery County, Maryland.
Yeah, right.
And that's why, you cannot dismiss. I mean, it gets me, man. Hey, man. I was talking about this months ago with a listener about the issue of lowering the voting age from 18 to 16. And the guy, the lefty, dismissed it out of hand. I mean, he was talking about ignorant Republican voters. And I said, well, wait a minute, what about Democrats who want to lower the voting age to 16? And this guy said, well, that's not, where's that happening? And I pointed out, well, it's a ridiculous idea. No one's ever going to take it seriously. And yet, of course, this week we have a Democrat dropping a bill to lower the voting age, to introduce a constitutional amendment to lower the voting age from 18 to 16.
Also, there's I don't know how many, but I know there are several jurisdictions around the country that have lowered the age.
Tacoma Park, Maryland, Jerry.
Yeah, and also Maryland.
Yeah.
In Maryland, also in Maryland, the city of Baltimore, Mayor Brandon Scott wants to lower the age.
To, yes, but he hasn't. Yeah. Tacoma Park, I believe, has done it.
Right, but here's the funny thing about that is you have all these Democrats who want to lower the age of voting age to 16, but at the same time won't give any of these 16-year-olds the opportunity to choose their own schools.
Right. Yeah, right. But they will allow them to choose their own body parts. Yes, didn't want to go down into that rabbit hole quite yet. Speaking of which, I do want to shift gears a little bit while we have the time, because we're talking about sort of Democrats telegraphing things. there's been an interesting trend online about people not being able to figure out parody accounts. And I will tell you something. For a long time, I had trouble figuring out. There's a guy named Nick Adams, or the one I was telling you about last night, the Ann Lesby. In fact, let me, Jerry, I want to pull this up because we were just talking about gas stoves. It's a good way to figure this out. Let me find this. Ann Lesby, I know.
Yeah. I'm less engaged in the whole Twitter social media.
I know.
But with that being said, it's obvious that Twitter and TikTok and social media has a enormous impact on our politics and our culture. So I don't dismiss it.
So this is the tweet. I will not. Oh, of course, yeah. I will not allow my children to eat food cooked on a gas stove. And it's very subtle, right? What I love about these kinds of parody accounts is that they, well, I guess if you read her, if you look at her name and you look at her bio, it's very clear. Ann Lesby, head of gender studies at something called ACL University, anti-racist fetus author, 1/8 Black, neurodivergent, typical, non-binary, semi-trans lesbian who dates men, vegan plus. And then, of course, her name, Ann Lesby, if you reverse it, is lesbian. But the tweet is so subtle, and what makes a good satire is that it could be something that a lefty says. And it just sort of they go through the replies, the responses from folks. Somebody said, I won't allow my kids to look at a gas stove. I won't allow my kids to play with friends whose families have gas stoves. I mean, it is so genius in the end. The reason why I bring it up is that some of these parody accounts are incredibly subtle. So this guy, Nick Adams, I don't know what the goal is. I mean, Ann Lesby is obviously to poke fun at the left. I think Nick Adams is to poke fun at the right. What I love is, come here, Charlie. My dog wants in today. Say hi, Jerry. Say hi to Charlie.
Hi, Charlie.
Yes. Nick, his moniker is Nick Adams Alpha Male, which to me, if you have to declare yourself to be an alpha male, it means that you're not. And he's a guy who looks like you and me, Jerry. He's a gentleman of rather large carriage, who proclaims that the ultimate in his alpha maleness is that he eats at Hooters, which to me automatically signifies that it's a parody account.
Right.
And I guess people finally started to realize it over the weekend because there was some controversy about M&Ms and M&Ms being, I don't know, it was some controversy about M&Ms and LGBTQIA plus. And this parody account was sort of going down the road of saying, I'm never going to eat M&Ms again. It was a whole thing. And finally, folks started to realize that it was not. And I bring it up because one of my trolls, someone who was that Hollywood producer who was trolling my account for a long time, has sort of spun off, and he is constantly responding to this guy, Nick Adams. And I got to tell you, I take great pleasure in watching that, Jerry. This guy who clearly has way too much time on his hands, who uses it to troll me or Matt Taibbi or, I don't know, pick another conservative, has all wrapped himself.
Well, Taibbi's not a conservative. He's a liberal. Taibbi's not a conservative.
No. But yes, but Taibbi's a truth teller.
Yes.
And so the fact that this Hollywood producer is now completely wrapped around the axle.
Well, think about, I understand Twitter, TikTok, other social media platforms impacts the public discourse. I get it. But rarely have I read something on TikTok or Twitter that is worth reading.
I don't know if that's true. I mean, because to me, I go to Twitter to read, to find out what friends of mine have published or colleagues have published or what other colleagues of mine are reading and are promoting. And then I go there for breaking news. right? If so, like
Sure, but that's I get that, and
right.
and that to me is similarly. I'll go to
Jerry,
Twitter.
this is why I'm no longer in the business of debating people on Twitter or arguing with people on Twitter, except in very rare occasions.
But I
just
I think of like Rob Reiner, and
Right.
the ridiculous things he tweets out is just not worth. It's not worth thinking about. I mean, God bless him. I mean, his father, a champion of comedy. His son
Yeah,
is just
something.
a meathead.
I would tell you something though. I tried reading Carl Reiner's biography.
Yeah.
And I could not get through it.
Why?
Because it was all very preachy lefty stuff.
Oh, that's so
I mean, it just,
disappointing.
once he sort of drilled down into how wonderful his kids were for their political activism, I was like, something, I'm done here. I loved the story that Carl Reiner tells about the first time Mel Brooks showed up at his beach house out on Long Island, like Fire Island or wherever they were.
Right.
And Mel Brooks showed up in the middle of the night, and Rob Reiner and his sister were told to not disturb the man who was going to be staying at the house. And apparently, at like 5 a.m, Mel Brooks had been there for 3 hours. He's sleeping in the breakfast nook, and all he can hear is these kids whispering, "Is that the man Daddy told us about?" Which is a great story. But then he goes in, and yes, and then my daughter became head of psychiatry at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, and she is this great humanitarian, active in all kinds of leftist causes. Something.
Well, Rob Reiner has made some good movies. Also, it's unfortunate.
Rob Reiner has. Yeah, as somebody pointed out, the most unbelievable casting in recent history was Rob Reiner as Leonardo DiCaprio's father in The Wolf of Wall Street.
It was hilarious. He was hilarious in it.
Yes, he was.
He was great.
And I love the fact that he watches The Equalizer, which is a show that I used to enjoy.
Anyway, I'm despairing optimist. I think that we should spend less time though on these social media platforms.
Well, of course. I mean, Jerry, you're absolutely right. I mean, it is the thing that contributes to us having an 8-second attention span.
Sure.
Yes. Agreed wholeheartedly. So before we let you go, Gerald,
and by the way, we will be sending out this podcast via Twitter.
Yes, of course. Well, I mean, listen, I mean, for Twitter and Facebook, that's how we promote these things. But and it gets down to it. In fact, we want you to share more of these things. So did you get a chance to watch The Banshees of Inisherin?
Oh yeah.
Yes, you did.
Yes.
We started to talk about it. I know I'm sort of shouting into my microphone here.
I thoroughly enjoyed it. It's a very Irish movie. It is in no way an American movie. It's an Irish movie. And I don't want to, spoil it, but it is an Irish movie with an Irish sense of itself, and even the characters and how they behave and why they behave the way they do. I'm waiting
for the day that Jerry's gonna come to me and say, "Don't talk to me anymore." You spent 2 hours telling me what was in your donkey shite.
What I told my kids, my older girls who were watching it, I said, look, and they, because it's somewhat, at the end of the day, the movie is somewhat it's unsatisfying.
It is very well, yes, because they don't get back. I don't want.
Well, they might. We don't know. It's I don't think they do because of how
it's unsettling. Because we can't get. I don't want to spoil it.
You can't get into it, but here's the thing. This is how I explained it to my children. The hunger strike.
Yes.
Now, most recently in Irish history, the hunger strike was used during the Troubles.
Yes.
But remember, the hunger strike is about shaming your enemy.
Yeah.
That's what it's about. The Irish believe that shaming your enemy is the very most just thing to do, most effective, most just. And that's what in this relationship, that's what the one man who wants to no longer have the relationship, that's what he's doing. He's trying to shame the other character. And that's what it's about. And Irish, again, it's for those who come from large Irish families, you'll watch this movie and understand exactly what I mean. It's Irish. Again, I already made this analogy. I'll do it again. But the movie Devil's Own Brad Pitt, Brad Pitt and
it's not an American story. It's an Irish
it's
one.
an Irish story. Yeah,
Yes.
it's in the same thing.
It's funny. I had wanted to see the movie Babylon, which is Brad Pitt and what's her name,
Margot Robbie.
Then it got panned, and then our colleague Amanda Milius, who is the daughter of the great filmmaker John Milius, she loved it, and now I'm kind of interested in seeing it again.
Well, Brad Pitt is never in a bad movie. I mean, this guy, I can't think of a bad movie. Brad Pitt.
Listen, I can think of movie. I mean, some of his earlier stuff. I can't watch Legends of the Fall, for instance. Did you see Bullet Train? Loved Bullet Train.
Loved it.
Yeah.
Loved it. He's great in that movie.
Yes.
And Legends of the Fall is not a bad movie. It's just it might not be your cup of tea, but it's not a bad movie.
I don't know. I thought it was just entirely overwrought. I don't know. It's an
Irish.
They call it's a bodice ripper. That's essentially what it is. I never liked what I hated about that movie.
Wow.
is that Aidan Quinn.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he is he's such a great character, and just his dad craps all over him the entire movie.
Again, that's a little bit of an Irish story, that movie.
Yeah, I'll buy that. Yeah.
So an American might find it unfulfilling, unsatisfied.
Yes, unsatisfying. Yeah, I get that.
I get that.
And you also saw The Menu.
Loved it.
Yeah, I don't know.
Loved it. Loved it.
It was crazy.
One of the best movies I've seen in the last 5 years.
It is a crazy movie. It really did.
And also why I liked it so much was
if you like those two movies, you'll like The Pale Blue Eye. What?
It surprised me.
Yes. Then you like The Pale Blue Eye. Different.
Well, again, I know a little bit about it. Is it a spoiler? This detective is who?
Well, he's Christian Bale.
No, but in the movie, his character is.
I don't know. What do you mean?
Isn't his character Edgar Allan Poe?
No. Christian Bale's not Edgar Allan Poe. Edgar Allan Poe was a student at
Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, yes, very good.
He is assisted in his investigations by Edgar Allan Poe.
Very good.
Yes.
All right.
And that's an integral point. A lot of folks don't know. It's funny because it's referenced in later on. In the movie Lincoln, there's a scene in which someone is talking about a cadet at the academy who failed out of the academy West Point because he thought that silica was a gas, and that if that person had gotten that question right, he might very well be a general by the time the Civil War rolled around. That was Edgar Allan Poe, who flunked.
And this was in Lincoln Vampire Slayer.
Yes, there's Abraham Lincoln. Vampires. I annoyed the hell out of my wife watching this movie because when I was a kid, I read a history of West Point that was actually published in like 1948. It was something on my grandparents' shelf. That was
right,
and I loved it. And I it was a book that I read over and over again, so I knew a lot about it. What else, Jerry? Is there anything else you want to cover today?
Well, I mean, there's lots of stuff. I do think this. I think that keep your eyes open to how the left, the media, the Democrats in particular, how they want to censor, how they want to stifle debate, and that's where the real issues are. And we're seeing that right on energy. We're seeing that when it comes to these classified documents. We're seeing that when it comes to free speech. We're seeing it when on myriad issues. I wish we could just say once and for all this. Stop having the argument over non-binary. It doesn't exist. And why are we engaging in their fantasy? But again, that's another place where you're not supposed to believe your lying eyes.
Have you seen this video? I should pull it up of this school board meeting in Idaho. Have you heard about this?
No.
Let me tell the story real quick. I won't play the video, but there, and this is Idaho. So we're not talking about a big city in Idaho like Boise or Pocatello, but a rural county. Yes, this is a humble brag of my Idaho knowledge, Gerald. But a county in rural Idaho on the Idaho-Oregon border, they have a school board meeting. The school board is discussing all kinds of these inclusive policies, access to the big one, of course, is access to the locker rooms, right?
Right.
And a state senator gets up to speak, and it's a conservative state senator, and he is pointing out the myriad ways in which the school board is violating existing state law, whether it's about curriculum or whether it's about debate and discussion. And the school board chairwoman moves to silence him, and then somebody else on the school board moves to adjourn the meeting. They adjourn the meeting in the middle of this guy's presentation, and bedlam ensues. I mean, it is a situation in which my point in bringing this up is that these things are not confined to Montgomery County, Maryland. Actually, it's interesting. Has this been something that's been discussed in Baltimore City schools?
Yes, the gender equity is all over Baltimore County, Baltimore City, Montgomery County.
But are we sure it's Baltimore City? Because I would have expected a much greater hue and cry from the parents in Baltimore City.
Are you kidding me? They're murdering 16-year-olds and there's no hue and cry.
Okay,
come on.
Well, yeah, but
I mean, literally
yeah.
10 days ago, a 16-year-old boy is shot.
We've talked about this,
dead,
yes.
And it's. But let me say this in terms of what we should cover and think about moving forward.
Yes.
This diversity, equity, and inclusion nonsense, right? Corporate culture has embraced it. Obviously, the political left has, media has. Jonathan Turley has been following this, and again, if you don't read his blog, go and read it.
JonathanTurley.org. Yep.
Yeah, and long story short, we're seeing more and more cases of individuals in their private lives affirming traditional Orthodox sexual ethics. Marriage is one man, one woman for life, or that there are two genders, not multi-genders, or even not so overt, but just saying they support J.K. Rowling.
Yes.
I enjoy J.K. Rowling. She's a good author, and all these attacks on her. I don't go for that. And they're being fired from their jobs.
Right.
I mean, fired.
Yeah. No.
Listen, you just simply say you support J.K. Rowling and you lose your job.
Law partner at one of DC's biggest firms. Yeah.
I mean, so I think that this attack on free speech and also the thought police is the biggest threat moving forward, because it impacts everything from COVID policy to energy policy to health policy to all these other issues. And it's almost like you said earlier, it's happening in plain sight.
And let me add to this, because it's a story you and I haven't really talked about, but the issue of government surveillance of speech is part of this. But the use of AI, artificial intelligence here.
Oh my, yeah.
I don't know if I don't think you and I talked about this.
We haven't,
story.
But lots of in the news recently where private entities like Madison Square Garden are using this technology to throw people out of,
to keep people out who've challenged, who've been lawyers who've challenged. But I'm going in a different direction here, Jerry. So building on what we were talking about earlier with Ben Cardin and the issue of hate speech.
Yeah.
We know that let me start this by saying I have a general problem with the automation of law enforcement generally, right? The concept of speed cameras bothers me on a whole host of levels, because because municipalities can set speed limits artificially low, and they use it as a revenue source. And
also in a city like Baltimore, you might have to go 30, 40 and a 25 because there's a squeegee guy who's trying to kill you.
But one of my favorite examples was in Washington D.C. on New York Avenue, which is a main thoroughfare in and out of D.C. The speed limit was set to, I think, 30 miles an hour. And they would frequently, because if New York Avenue is open, the speed limit on New York Avenue should probably be 45 miles an hour. You should be able to get in and out of there fairly quickly, given the width of the roads and depending on the traffic levels.
It's like a highway.
It is like a highway. And
when you come off of 50, right? That it's
50 and 295. So you know, either the Baltimore Washington Parkway or Route 50. Yes.
Yeah, it's highway-ish.
But when COVID happened, you know, traffic in and out of DC dropped. Their revenues dropped because they weren't getting, you know, speeders on Route 50. So what did they do? They dropped the speed limit on New York Avenue from 30 to 25. Wow. And that way, yeah. So here's my point. We know that the Chinese use AI to deal with their social crediting system. It's a whole thing. And my point is, here in the United States, we know that the Biden administration has spent hundreds of thousands of dollars giving money to places like the University of Washington to develop artificial intelligence software. This sounds like tinfoil hat, conspiracy theorizing. It's not, it's out there. It is verifiable. This has happened. Artificial intelligence, AI software to monitor microaggressions in speech. And again, when you have something that is a truly a subjective idea, the concept of the microaggression.
I know.
And you're policing speech, and then you add it to AI, and then we know that there are folks who want to implement a Chinese-style social crediting system here at home.
You're right.
This gets into what Jerry's talking about.
You know, it's like that movie, Tom Cruise movie, that
Minority Report,
but also like Body Snatchers, in so much as Body Snatchers was the original movie really was about conformity and the threat of communism, right? The original one with Donald Sutherland and Brooke Adams. There was a remake, right? No, that's the remake.
Okay.
The original was before that. It was a black and white film.
Right. This is the George Romero one, I think. It was.
Right. Anyway, long story short,
because they remade it a third time.
Right.
Long story short.
But the thing is that, right, if you showed any kind of emotion, they got you.
Yeah.
And this has been a mechanism for the left forever, where they want to control. They find ways to control your thoughts, your ideas.
This is why the Idaho school board thing is so damning, because as the state senator opens up his speech with saying, you say that public comment can't be used to criticize individual employees of the school district. And that runs directly counter to what the Supreme Court has said on this. So as that's the thing, guys, it gets back into, who we are as a people and why we have these things protected. The founding fathers were ultimately very brilliant in their prose. The First Amendment is very simple and straightforward, and it's very elegant. The whole idea is you have the widest breadth of speech, so that you can petition the government for your redress of grievances. So you can have open and frank discussions and hold government accountable. And government should not be in the business of suppressing those things. And when government starts to, that's a real problem.
Yeah. Jerry,
when are you on next?
I'm on Wednesday, January 18th,
tomorrow.
10 to 2. Yeah, tomorrow at WBAL. And then, of course, every Sunday, the Jerry Rogers Show.
Yeah, there you go. Well, I'm not doing other fill-in work right now. We do have a new episode up this week of the Lunch Hour with Federal Newswire. I interviewed Charlie Sauer, which is a really interesting podcast, to say the least. Because Jerry, do you know this? Charlie Sauer is an inventor.
I want to say I knew that.
I think I mentioned it to you. I may have mentioned
Charlie
from the Market Institute.
Hey, I have to make a correction. I earlier said that on energy issues. I said Alex Bernstein. It's not. It's Alex Epstein.
Alex Epstein. Yes. You got him confused with Alex Berenson, who is the great.
Yeah. Yes. But also but check out Alex Epstein. Energy on energy issues. He's fantastic.
Yep. Absolutely. 100%. Well, Jerry, what do you want people to do?
Well, it's becoming more and more difficult, but find the truth, plant your feet, stand firm. God bless you.
God bless you, Jerry. Have a great week, everybody. Have fun, and please stay safe.